People from Norway, Sweden, just a few. Let us have a few. From Denmark, do you mind sending us a few people?
From white countries?
Send us some nice people, do you mind?
Why can't we send the nice white people, like white people don't commit crimes?
Somalia, places that are a disaster, right? Filthy, dirty, disgusting, ridden with crime.
Pretty textbook, Adam.
Yeah, look, most Americans are descended from poor Europeans who came from poor countries, whose own countries at the time were struggling and poor. Number one. Number two, the most educated subgroup of immigrants in the United States is Nigerian immigrants. So this idea that, you know, if the immigrants don't come from Northern Europe, which is racist on its own, they can't contribute to American society is false. And there's a word for saying, if you come from this country, you're bad. That word is bigotry. So this expression, I mean, you notice Mr. Persians for Trump in the background there was a little quiet during that sequence. But look, he's been open about this, you know, for years. And I think there's a sort of denial that's been happening in the press about what this man believes, in part because they're afraid of offending the very large number of Americans who support what he says and agree with him. But the reality is that this is an extremely racist ideological view of the world. It's wrong. And if you applied it to, you know, most of the countries that Americans today are descended from, they wouldn't have been let in either.
Yeah, I've been doing some research recently on 19th century Sicilian immigration in the U.S., and you would not believe the things they said about Sicilians at that point, but they were essentially equivalent to what the president is saying here. There's also something about last night. So that before he played that clip, he has a moment where he stops and he's sort of thinking about, should I admit that I said this thing? And this to me was also interesting about this moment, Philip, because it was, you know, there was, when that was reported, there was, of course, denials. Here's Dick Durbin talking about it. He says, I'll never forget hearing Donald Trump's racist asshole countries comment in a 2018 Oval Office meeting about immigration. Tom Cotton and David Perdue claimed Trump didn't say it and accused me of lying. The truth comes out. And obviously, this is not news to anyone watching this program that Donald Trump lies, but it did strike me as a useful little peek behind the curtain for everyone that this kind of thing is happening all the time, and their denials are worth exactly what you think they are.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I remember that scoop. I was at the Post at the time. It was a Washington Post scoop by Josh Dawsey. And yeah, I mean, everyone knew that, of course, he had said this thing. Like, anyone who is cognizant of what Donald Trump says in general is going to understand that this is going to be something he says. You know, I do think this is important. Look, you know, it's easy to be sort of cynical and assume that none of this is going to get through to his base, and it very well may not. But this is also occurring at a time when Donald Trump is talking about how horrible CNN is and how horrible these other news outlets are and how they can't be trusted and how they're full of lies. You know, you read what he was saying about the New York Times. Over and over and over again, it has been demonstrated that when people are saying things critical of Donald Trump, they are saying those things because they are accurate, right? Yeah. That this is a reflection of the real world that Donald Trump is trying to keep at bay. And it is useful for him, exactly as you said, to say that, no, actually, yeah, they were right all along, because it does at least bolster the idea that in this fight between reality and surreality, reality actually does have the advantage of being true.
Philip Bump at Adam Serwer. Thank you both. Appreciate it. We'll be right back.
So what are you thinking?
I'm thinking about our honeymoon. What about Africa? Safari. Swim with elephants. Hot air balloon rides. Lions growling in the giraffes that come in through your window.
Wait, can we afford a safari? Great question. Like everything, it takes a little planning.
Or put the money towards a down payment.
With enough room for a baby?
Babies.
Baby.
Let's take a look at those scenarios.
JP Morgan Wealth Management has advisors in Chase branches and tools like Wealth Plan to help keep you on track. When you're planning for it all, the answer is JP Morgan Wealth Management.
This holiday, Skechers has the perfect gift for everyone. Hands-free, cozy fit Skechers slip-ins. Just step in and go with no bending down or touching. Grandma's going hands-free. The kids are going hands-free. Even the big guy's going hands-free. Give everybody hands-free, cozy fit Skechers slip-ins for Christmas.
250 years ago, a promise was made. How we deliver has changed, but our purpose hasn't. It's the peace of mind knowing your love arrives reliably and affordably. The United States Postal Service. Delivering since 1775.
It looks like an ordinary staircase, but as you age with occasional nerve discomfort that can feel like stabbing or pins and needles in your hands and feet, sometimes stairs can bring worry. As a retired physician, I've seen it in my patients, but I didn't truly understand it until I got older myself. So now, I take Nervive.
Nervive reduces occasional nerve discomfort. It combines neurotropic B vitamins with a clinically studied...
But we always take people from Somalia, places that are a disaster, right? Filthy, dirty, disgusting, ridden with crime. The only thing they're good at is going after ships.
I mean, first of all, that was a speech that was supposed to be about the economy, but that was obviously just a repulsive and racist thing to say. And yet, with a few exceptions, just a few, barely a peep, not even barely a peep from most Republicans. And it made me think back to that time during Trump's first term. Remember when the Washington Post reported that Trump had used that term, S-hole countries, behind closed doors? It was a massive scandal at the time, for good reason. And Trump, at the time, denied it. He vehemently denied he said those words. And while it was by no means all of them, lots and lots and lots of Republicans immediately denounced Trump's language. And most importantly, Republican leadership did at the time. I mean, here was then Republican Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan.
Yeah, I read those comments later last night. So first thing that came to my mind was very unfortunate, unhelpful. Whether you're coming from Haiti, we've got great friends from Africa in Janesville who are doctors who are just incredible citizens. And I just think it's important that we celebrate that.
I mean, his head is literally hanging down as he's being forced to respond to the president at the time's comments. But now Trump is not just saying these disgusting things behind closed doors. Now he feels emboldened enough to say them out loud in public into a microphone. And now here's what we're hearing from the current Republican Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, about Trump's remarks.
The president is expressing his frustration about the extraordinary challenge that is presented to America. We have people coming in, not assimilating, and trying to take over the country.
First of all, I can't believe I have to say this, but that's an insanely inaccurate depiction of these communities. But also, that's quite the contrast to the response of the former speaker just a few years ago. But of all the elected Republican officials you might expect to stick up for the Somali American population, all of them should, but for all that you would expect that Trump is demonizing right now, the most notable is Republican Majority Whip Minnesota Congressman Tom Emmer. And that's because not only is his state home to the largest Somali population in the United States, but the city of St. Cloud, Minnesota, which Emmer represents, is home to thousands of Somali immigrants, most of whom are U.S. citizens or legal permanent residents. And when that population first arrived in St. Cloud, Congressman Emmer was one of their staunchest defenders. I mean, in Congress, Emmer even helped launch the House Somalia Caucus to advocate for his constituents. And he did that even though there were a number of his other constituents in his district who were adamantly opposed to the influx of Somali people in their city. They even pushed Emmer to put a ban on Muslims moving to St. Cloud, which he refused to do. And here's how Emmer defended Somali immigrants 10 years ago.
And if you're asking me how I feel about immigrant populations who are in this country legally and who are actually trying to find a better way for themselves and their families, I support it wholeheartedly. I'm going to say it out loud. When you move to a community, as long as you are here legally, I am very sorry, but you don't get to slam the gate behind you and tell nobody else that they're welcome. That's not the way this country works.
You don't get to slam the gate behind you. That's not the way the country works. That was 10 years ago. But now that Trump and the MAGA movement have decided to scapegoat the Somali population, Emmer isn't just refusing to denounce Trump, he is demonizing the Somali community himself. I mean, here was Emmer last week after Trump called Somalis garbage that he doesn't want in the country.
But you know what we're not talking about today? Do you realize that, it's not that all Somalis are committing crimes, but 80% of the crimes being committed in the Twin Cities in Minnesota are being committed by Somalis.
Even though, again, that it is obvious, it should be obvious. I should point out that Emmer's disgusting statement there is false. It is wildly inaccurate. But it fits the bigger lie that Trump and his followers have been pushing about immigrants more broadly. That immigrants are committing the overwhelming majority of crimes. They are not. That immigrants are people to be feared. They are not. Over and over again, we have seen Trump and his administration say that they are only arresting the worst of the worst when they arrest immigrants. That's their major talking point. And over again, we have seen proof that that is not at all the case. But Trump and his followers are demonizing immigrants anyway. Clearly, there's been a shift here since Trump's first term, in some ways. I mean, Republicans now either seem too afraid to speak out against Trump's demonizing of immigrants, or they're echoing it themselves. And they might think that is politically expedient for them. Many of them may be making that calculation. You know, that way they survive politically. The way they can do that is to basically not make the big boss mad. That's part of their calculation. But in the long view of history, I really think they're going to regret that decision. I mean, one day Donald Trump is going to leave political office, and they are going to be left with a stain that they will never be able to shake. And that brings me back to our first guest tonight, because there are so many lessons from history to look to as we attempt to navigate the moment we are all living through. And I know we're all trying to navigate it and work through it. And nobody explains the lessons of history better than my first guest. Rachel Maddow has a new podcast out called Burn Order. It is about the U.S. government's incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II. Specifically, the podcast is about the people inside the U.S. government who orchestrated the whole thing, and about the small but mighty group of people who tried to stop it. Because for the most part, when we learn about the incarceration of Japanese Americans, we learn about it, of course, as a horrible thing that happened. But we don't focus all too much on just how many Americans let it happen. I mean, in the immediate aftermath of Pearl Harbor, the nation was swept up in a complete wave of xenophobia. All across the country, elected leaders followed that xenophobic path. And here's a bit from Rachel's new podcast about how those elected leaders expressed those views.
The governor of Wyoming says people in my state don't like Orientals, and says that in Wyoming, quote, there would be Japs hanging from every pine tree. The governor of Kansas and the governor of New Mexico both say that they will direct police to physically block, to physically turn back any Japanese Americans who appear at their border. The governor of Idaho says, and forgive me here, but he says, the Japs live like rats, breathe like rats, and act like rats. We don't want them.
Now, as disgusting as all of that is, and it is disgusting, it's important to hear it to understand that that was the popular political stance at the time. But there was one politician who didn't take that stance. Colorado Governor Ralph Carr, and here's how he responded to the nation's surge in xenophobia after Pearl Harbor.
Our first duty this morning and today is to try to be calm. Our danger now is that our emotions may take too great control of our activities and our thoughts.
3 days after the attack at Pearl Harbor, Ralph Carr goes on statewide radio and says that he personally will not judge the loyalty of any man based on where their grandparents were born. He sends a letter to the Japanese American Citizens League newspaper saying, to the American citizen with Japanese parents, we offer you the hand of friendship. Friendship. While people are asking anyone of Japanese descent to be killed, Ralph Carr is extending the hand of friendship to these individuals.
So Governor Carr then went town to town around his state of Colorado, defending the rights of Americans of Japanese descent. He faced crowds of his own constituents who quite literally told him that all Americans of Japanese descent should be killed. And he tried to talk sense into them. And clearly, when you take the long view, Governor Ralph Carr was on the right side of history. But ultimately, he was voted out of office for doing what he did, for sticking up for what was right, even when it isn't popular. And that is actually where Rachel's podcast on our current politics may have a bit of a hopeful contrast. Because clearly sticking up for immigrants is not only the right moral thing to do, it is also far more politically popular than it was back in the 1940s. I mean, all across the country, we have seen massive protest after massive protest demanding that the government stop its draconian immigration agenda. And electorally, people that are standing up for immigrants keep getting voted into office. I mean, take, for instance, Miami's new Democratic Mayor Eileen Higgins, the first one in 30 years. She ran a race that was about affordability and getting things done, as any mayor would in this day and age, but it was also about the cruelty of Trump's immigration policies. She didn't hold back on that at all. She called out her opponent. And last night, while Trump was making his disgusting comments about immigrants, Higgins became the first Democrat to win the Miami mayoral race in nearly 30 years. She won a city in which Trump and Kamala Harris were neck and neck, and she won it by a resounding 19 points. Here were some of her first comments as mayor-elect just this morning.
When I speak to our residents, it's not just about frustration, it's also about fear. They've never been afraid of their government before, and now they are. And there has not been a community meeting that I have gone to where I have not had someone come up, give me a hug, whisper in my ear, and say, my brother was taken, my uncle was taken. Sometimes they'll tell me it was to Alligator Alcatraz. Sometimes they have no idea where their relative is. We don't want law-abiding people to be ejected from our country, impoverishing their family and driving our economy into ruin.
This all just makes me think about, what is the point of being an elected leader if you don't lead? If you don't stick up for the people without power? And what can history tell us about what it means for so much of the Republican Party to be abdicating their responsibility like this? Joining me now is my friend and colleague, Rachel Maddow. Episodes 3 and 4 of her incredible new podcast, Burn Order, are out now. It is so good. You make history just fly. I would have been a history major if there was a Professor Maddow teaching, but here we are. Let me just start. In the podcast, you don't explicitly draw a comparison to what we're seeing today. And I tried to do that with the help of some of our amazing producers. But as you look back at the moment you cover in this podcast, and you look at everything I just laid out, how do you see the parallels and also, of course, the differences?
Well, first of all, Jen, thanks for having me here. And that was an incredible lead-in. That was an incredible A-block. That was really, really good. Really thought-provoking for me, who's been steeped in all of this stuff. But let me just say, I think that the parallel that you drew, the positive parallel that you drew, is really useful. That we are seeing Americans protest right now against what the Trump administration is doing. And one of the things that didn't happen in 1942, when Japanese Americans were being thrown out of their homes, rounded up, put on buses, put on trains, and taken to detention centers, and then taken to prison camps, which FDR called concentration camps, one of the things that didn't happen was, mass street protests, other Americans turning out and saying, stop, we're not going to stand for this. And yes, there was a lot else going on in 1942 when we were just into the war and we were losing the war, and there was a huge mobilization happening. But when more than 100,000 Americans were incarcerated this way, essentially in defiance, an open defiance of the Constitution, most Americans did not peep. And so this is the story of the regret of a country that didn't stop it when we could have, the way that we investigated it, apologized for it, literally paid reparations, but also the stories of the truly unique people who did stand up. It took a special kind of person, and that means it's, for me at least, looking back on it, a special kind of role model for what it means to not go along to get along, to actually recognize when something's wrong, stand up and object. Even if you don't think you can stop it, it matters when you object and when you try to mitigate the harm.
The History Books or Rachel Maddow podcast will certainly talk about it, which is important for people to remember how they will be looked at in history. One of the other parallels, it seems, but I want to know your thoughts on this. You've done such a beautiful job explaining it. Is the legal pushback? As you noted, the pushback was effective, small but mighty, but effective in some ways, even though a lot of people didn't participate in it. And we're seeing a bigger version of that now publicly, but we're also seeing a lot of legal pushback today. Just today, a judge ordered U.S. troops get out of Los Angeles. There's so many cases out there of different legal groups standing up for people who are being detained. Tell us, obviously, the courts were a bit different then, but talk to us a little bit about the legal pushback around the time of Japanese incarceration, how you think that compares to the role the courts are playing now.
It's a really interesting point of comparison. So the heroes of Burn Order are Japanese Americans who brought cases that challenged the incarceration, who brought them all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the thriller aspect of the podcast is that there was essentially a crime perpetrated by the government in defending against those cases and defending the incarceration policy. They withheld evidence from the court, which lawyers are not allowed to do, the government is not allowed to do. And the uncovering of that crime, of that government misconduct, is an incredibly thrilling story that it takes all sorts of interesting characters to unwind over decades. But, the courts essentially greenlit this because they took the government's word for it when the government didn't deserve to be trusted on this. And we see a lot of parallels to that right now with the Trump administration in court telling judges things that the judges palpably can't believe and that aren't true and that are disproven. The presumption of regularity, we keep hearing about that. When the government lies to the courts, it clears the way for the courts to essentially greenlight things that are things that the country will regret. And I think one of the most corrosive things the Trump administration is doing, particularly around the way it's treating immigrants, is lying to the courts about what they're doing. And that puts both the courts and the government and the victims of these policies in absolutely untenable positions that will be vindicated by history and that will ruin a lot of lives on both sides of these fights over the course of these issues as they play out.
The way they're arguing things in courts and some of the people they're putting in courts to argue them, I would also say, is so emboldened, feels much more emboldened than the first term and different to me. And I think you alluded to that, too. And it also feels like Trump himself is more emboldened in terms of what he's willing to say publicly. I mean, I just talked about how back during the first term, he felt the need to deny that he used the phrase S-hole countries in the first term. I'm just, you know, you could say the word, but I'm not going to say it right now. And last night, he kind of, I mean, he shouted it into the it's not positively. What do you make of this and why he feels so emboldened to be this way?
Yeah, it's really interesting. And it's a challenge for us in the media, and it's a challenge for us as citizens right now, because I feel like so everything that's wrong in the country so that you're not held accountable for it. You're trying to turn people in this country against each other so that they blame each other. They see some group of people in this country as inhuman. That then justifies inhumane treatment toward them, which justifies radical government powers that the Constitution says we're not supposed to have. When you talk about people as rats and rabbits, and you talk about them being unassimilable and responsible for all the crime and all these other things that we're hearing from the Trump administration now openly, all they are trying to do is pave the way for authoritarian powers for themselves, for emergency powers toward an inhuman set of scapegoats that's supposed to justify anything they want to do. It's augmenting their own powers at the expense of a scapegoat, and it's the authoritarian playbook back to the very beginning of time. When they're doing it openly, we need to change our analysis to recognize what they're using it for and not just point out that they're saying it.
Yeah, that is such an important reminder of how we consume it and how we talk about it, which I know you remind us of so often. We're going to be greedy with you because you literally wrote a book about the greed of the oil industry, and it feels just so topical today. So if you don't mind sitting tight where you are just for a quick break, we'll be right back and we'll talk about that on the other end.
Great, thanks.
Answer as to whether he would keep the oil. What was going on in Rachel Maddow's head?
Oh, Jen, I just feel like, I mean, I feel like if you stop somebody on the street, just like man on the street interview, like, why are we going to war with Venezuela? Anybody, like, if you asked 100 people, would a single one of those people have an answer that would be the same answer as anybody else, that would match anything that the administration was saying? They'd all be different. And so first it was, we're blowing up those drug boats off of Venezuela because of fentanyl. Well, fentanyl doesn't come from Venezuela. Nope. Oh, okay, no, we're not doing that anymore. No, we're just trying to stop drug trafficking. These are all, that's why we're doing this. Is all about drug trafficking. It's drug trafficking boats. It's Maduro is involved in drug trafficking somehow. So that's okay. And then simultaneously, Trump pardons the president of Honduras, former president of Honduras, who is one of the most prolific drug traffickers ever convicted in this country. Now they're saying, oh, it's violating Iran sanctions. Oh, okay, violating Iran sanctions. That's why we're going to war with Venezuela. While Trump just pardoned the Binance guy. What did the Binance guy need to be pardoned for? $898 million worth of Iran sanctions violations, right? Plus funding Al-Qaeda and ISIS and Hamas and the and Islamic Jihad. So like all of the things that they keep saying it is, clearly they're not. And so what is it? Apparently it's a regime change war so we can try to take their oil. Well, that'll work out great. That's always worked out great for us in the past. I mean, what's going on here? And who's driving this? Trump doesn't seem to have any idea what's going on here or why.
No, which is an evergreen statement about Trump and national security in general, it seems. I keep thinking, and again, it's important that we don't totally know what's going on here, but about his obsession over the course of time with taking oil from other countries, which he has talked about for so many years, and I am betting his oil baron friends are in his mind. But we will learn more over the coming days. I mean, this is all kind of to your point. I mean, these extrajudicial strikes, the seizure of this oil tanker, it's so many things going on that feels over the legal line and feels like it's setting incredibly dangerous precedents. As you look at the totality of it, I mean, what concerns you most about what you're seeing and really where this goes? Because this is a very slippery slope. I think they feel justified to seize more oil tankers. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's basically three things going on here. I think one is that Trump wants to demonstrate that he is unconstrained by law, politics, or public opinion. Like he wants to, the reason there's no king's protests against Trump is not just because he calls himself a king and, you know, looks the part, but because he is trying to create an illegal or sort of non-legal regime around himself in which he is unconstrained by any of the things that legally constrain an American president. So that's dangerous. That's part of what this is. The other thing that's really bad about this is it looks like we might get a war. And it really looks like a regime change war to try to take their oil, which really is something we know a lot about in this country and is supposedly part of the reason that Trump arose in Republican politics, because he was against those sorts of things. Like that's supposedly the whole theory of the case for why J.D. Vance exists, right, as a political figure. But the last thing I think is the weirdest thing to worry about, which is that Trump really doesn't seem to have any idea why he's going to war in Venezuela, nor does he seem to be in charge of any of the decisions that are leading us to this war. And so we also have to worry about who's actually running the government right now and who is actually driving us toward this regime change war that the president doesn't seem to be at the helm of. We don't know who is, and we don't know why. And that sort of careening feeling that you're having right now is the most worrying part of all of this to me.
It is. I worked for two presidents. I've never seen such a lack of interest in what we are doing with our military power from the commander-in-chief. Rachel Maddow, I could talk to you for a long time, but we gotta wait for Senator Jon Ossoff, who's standing here, and I'm looking forward to talking to him. Thank you so much. Your podcast is excellent. Looking forward to more episodes.
Thank you, Jen. Really nice of you to have me. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay. Coming up, after a shocking win for Democrats in Georgia last night, it was not follow every race. That is an enormous swing. And it of course follows the long and growing list of huge electoral swings towards Democrats during this off-election year cycle ahead of next year's midterms, including two statewide elections Democrats in Georgia won by large margins back in November. And someone who has to be feeling very good about all of these wins is Georgia Senator Jon Ossoff, the only senator up there.
Discussion with Rachel tonight that you brought up her book Blowout about the oil industry of a few years ago, which I absolutely loved, cover to cover. Every page learned something about the oil industry. It's an amazing piece of work and so important for thinking about what's going on with Donald Trump and this oil tanker tonight. Just perfect timing on that.
No question about it. As I said to her, we're going to be greedy. We're going to keep you to talk longer because you've actually thought a lot about the oil industry, and it's so relevant today.
I'm so glad you did. I'm so glad you did. Thanks, Jen.
Thanks, Lawrence.
Thank you. Well, Donald Trump confessed last night. Donald Trump confessed that he was lying. Donald Trump turned himself in as a pathological liar last night. During his first term in the White House, Donald Trump was quoted by unnamed sources who were constantly leaking what Donald Trump was saying in private. And one of the quotes attributed to him was Donald Trump referring to African countries where he has never been, using the worst dirtiest term he could think of for those countries. It's the kind of language I've heard from hardcore racists my whole life. I knew he was lying in 2018 when he denied using those words. And last night in Pennsylvania, the man who doesn't drink sounded as drunk as the racists you can hear saying things like this in the safety of their neighborhood bars.
Hellholes like Afghanistan, Haiti, Somalia, and many other countries. I didn't say shithole, you did. Remember I said that to the senators they came in? The Democrats. They wanted to be bipartisan. So they came in and they said, this is totally off the record. Nothing mentioned here. We want to be honest because our country was going to hell. And we had a meeting. And I say, why is it we only take people from shithole countries, right?
It's not news that Donald Trump is a racist. It's not news that Donald Trump, who was documented to have told over 30,000 lies in his first term in office, is a pathological liar. It's not news that Donald Trump is a vile, ugly stain on American public life. What we are seeing now is a very sick man in mental and physical deterioration who seems to have no capacity left to remember what he's already lied about, what he's already denied, and has less and less public control over the poisonous racism that seethes inside him and oozes out of him. He is a poison that children should not be exposed to. And he gets worse every day as he declines deeper into mental and physical infirmity and sinks deeper into his own poison. And the only reasonable way to consider what Donald Trump says every day now, especially after last night, is to presume he is lying now. Presume Donald Trump is lying now and fully deserves the presumption of lying. That's what Donald Trump has earned. He has earned the presumption of lying. Think about everything he said today, about anything, and just presume it is a lie. Not one word of it is regardable as anything but a lie until it is somehow proven true by other sources. And that's what makes interviews of Donald Trump so ridiculous and pointless. Every single time, every interview of Donald Trump is filled with lies in every response to every question that is put to him. Every single one of them. The presumption of lying. That's the only way to cover Donald Trump. It has always been the only way to cover Donald Trump. I said Donald Trump was a liar the minute he opened his mouth about Barack Obama's birth certificate in 2011, and no one else did. They all covered it as if there was some story there to cover that wasn't a madman lying. That's all it ever was. A sick, racist, pathological liar. That's all he ever was every time he opened his mouth about President Obama. And the news media pretended it was something else. They invited them on their shows, and they pretended there was something to talk about. And he would tell them he was sending private detectives to Hawaii to check out the birth certificate, and I said he was lying and he was sending no one, and I was right. That's how easy it was. Because I knew then that Donald Trump deserved the presumption of lying and nothing else. And the news media let him get away with that kind of lying to the point where the New York Times first used the word lie 5 years later in 2016 in covering Donald Trump. And the lie they identified 5 years after he started telling it, the New York Times finally felt confident enough to say Donald Trump was lying about President Obama's birth certificate. 5 years they lost in understanding how to cover Donald Trump. 5 years of not understanding that he had already earned the presumption of lying. And so with the presumption of lying, will consider what Donald Trump did today. We don't know much about the oil tanker that Donald Trump seized off the coast of Venezuela today. And it turns out, according to him, he doesn't either.
Can you explain a little more about this Venezuelan oil tanker and share a little more information?
Well, I'll let the people do it, but you see the result, and I guess they probably have released the pictures by now or pretty soon. You'll discuss that with the appropriate people later on, but no, it was seized for a very good reason.
We have never heard what that very good reason was from Donald Trump today. No other president would have treated news like that. No other president would have said, oh, it was a very good reason, and leave it at that. And what about the oil?
What happens to the oil on this ship? Well, we keep it, I guess.
We keep it, I guess. I don't know, he said. He doesn't know. I don't know either. And so there we are. The President of the United States doesn't know what happens to everything he sees today. He doesn't know what happens to the vessel. He doesn't know what happens to the oil. He later said to another reporter, I can assume we're going to keep the oil. Why can he assume that? The Venezuelan government is calling it piracy. According to a government official who spoke on the condition of anonymity, the New York Times reported it was not clear whether the seizure warrant, there was a seizure warrant in this case issued by a federal judge. And the Times is saying it's not clear whether the seizure warrant, which is sealed, was for the ship or the oil or both. The White House did not immediately respond when asked whether the United States had the legal authority to keep the oil. That is exactly what American forces could do when they believe they see drug smuggling heading for the United States. They could just seize the vessel. That's what they've always done, until Donald Trump decided to kill everyone on those very small boats, open boats, most of them less than 20 feet long, with outboard engines, the kind of boats that people use for water skiing in this country, boats that cannot possibly carry enough fuel and are not seaworthy enough to cross oceans. Boats that are over 1,000 miles away from the United States of America and are not capable of reaching the United States of America. If you're on one of those boats, the smallest targets the United States military has ever had at sea, if you're on one of those boats, Donald Trump will kill you. But if you're on a supertanker, Donald Trump won't fire a shot at you. In that discussion with reporters, Donald Trump unintentionally revealed why he seized that supertanker today.
Mr. President, has Secretary Hegseth told you why he hasn't released the video of the second strike?
No, he hasn't told me. I thought that issue was dead. You're surprised you bring it up. You must be CNN. And there you have it. Donald Trump trying to declare an issue dead, just like he tried to declare the Epstein Files dead 6 months before Congress was forced into a unanimous vote to release the Epstein Files. Donald Trump seized that ship today to change the subject from the second missile that he and his incompetent and unqualified Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth fired at two men who were clinging to the wreckage of a very small boat already destroyed by a missile that may have been bigger than the boat itself. When Senator Mark Warner, the vice chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, became one of the first members of Congress to see that video of the second missile strike of the two survivors clinging to the wreckage, he came on this program and told us that he believed those two men were incapacitated. That was his word, incapacitated, when the second strike was ordered to kill them. It is the most important crisis that Pete Hegseth has faced in his incompetent service as Secretary of Defense. And the issue is not dead. Donald Trump knows the story is not dead. And Donald Trump is not surprised that the reporter brought it up. This is the very same act that Donald Trump tried with the Epstein Files 6 months ago. Are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein? This guy's been talked about for years. You're asking, we have Texas, we have this, we have all of the things. And are people still talking about this guy, this creep? That is unbelievable.
Unbelievable indeed that that buffoon thinks that that play is going to work again. That's the Donald Trump playbook. Declare an issue to be dead. Wish it to be dead. Donald Trump can kill people, but he cannot kill that issue. That second strike missile that killed those two men clinging to the wreckage is going to be haunting Donald Trump possibly for more than the next year. Donald Trump is trying the same maneuver he tried with the Epstein Files, which is to manage a cover-up of that video the way he tried to cover up the Epstein Files, make sure no one ever sees the video of the second missile strike. And it may be that Donald Trump succeeds in intimidating the Republican leadership of the committees in the House and the Senate with jurisdiction over this issue to not conduct real investigations. And if that happens, then our first guest tonight will ultimately be in charge of the first real investigation of that missile strike in the House of Representatives. Congressman Adam Smith is the top-ranking Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee, and when the Democrats win back the House of Representatives in November, as polls indicate they will, Congressman Smith will become Chairman Smith, chairman of the House Armed Services Committee with jurisdiction over Pete Hegseth and the Defense Department, and he will have the authority to obtain that video. On November 28th, the Senate Armed Services Committee Chair Roger Wicker announced that the Senate Armed Services Committee would conduct an investigation into the second missile strike. Last night, the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee announced that he has completed his investigation of the missile strike. This morning, Chairman Rogers reported on his investigation.
I did exactly what I said. I was very vigorous. I personally got involved. I talked with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs first. I talked with the SecDef second. Then we had the Admiral Bradley come in. He gave us a full readout on what happened. We saw the video, got all our questions answered. Talked yesterday at length with Admiral Halsey. I know everything that happened, and I'm completely comfortable we got all the facts.
And you feel comfortable and you believe that the administration acted within its bounds and its
I absolutely do.
Okay, and no, you have no more questions about
I have no more questions.
Yesterday, the Republican and Democratic leaders of the Senate Armed Services Committee and House Armed Services Committee met privately with Admiral Alvin Halsey, who announced his resignation as the head of U.S. Southern Command. Politico reports, though reports indicate Halsey expressed concerns about the legality of strikes against alleged drug boats and was ousted by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, Chairman Rogers said Halsey told lawmakers his departure is personal. He just said that's private, Rogers said. He said it had nothing to do with the operations in his command. Democratic Senator Jackie Rosen of Nevada is a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. She said this morning before the seizure of the oil tanker later today off the Venezuelan coast.
Secretary Hegseth doesn't have the character or demeanor. He just likes to, well, I'm just going to say it this way, he just likes to show pictures of blowing shit up. I got a bunch of video games, if that's what he wants to do that don't put any active duty men or women in harm's way. He wants to blow shit up and put pictures of it up. God bless him. But don't you dare put anybody in harm's way for your visual.
Senator
and we
Jackie
stand up
Rosen.
and protect everyone.
Leading off our coverage tonight is Democratic Congressman Adam Smith of Washington. He's the top Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee. Congressman Smith, thank you.